It begins with a quiet scene. A person sits alone in a dimly lit room, the hum of life outside fading into nothing but background noise. The air feels heavy, not because of what's happening now, but because of everything that's already been lived. Every memory feels like a half-closed door, slightly ajar, letting in a draft of cold air. They've been told that to heal, they must go back. That to move forward, they have to revisit every pain, every scar, every name that still stings when spoken. But what if that's not true? What if the more we dig, the deeper we bury ourselves? In a culture obsessed with emotional excavation, we've mistaken healing for excavation. We're told to process everything, to face our demons, to sit with the pain until it dissolves. Yet no one tells us what happens when the pain doesn't dissolve, when it stays reshaped, reanimated, alive again because we keep calling it forth. The irony is quiet but cruel. In trying to heal, we often reopen what was trying to close. We pour salt into old wounds thinking it's medicine. We confuse motion with transformation, suffering with sincerity. We call it self-awareness, but sometimes it's just self-torture disguised as progress. Every memory, every regret, becomes an altar we keep visiting, hoping one day it will bless us instead of haunt us. But memory doesn't always want to be handled. Sometimes it wants to fade, to decompose quietly in the soil of your subconscious. But we dig it up again, examine it, write about it, talk about it endlessly, and then wonder why it still hurts. Maybe healing isn't about how deeply you can remember. Maybe it's about how gently you can forget. People often think healing means becoming clean again, untainted, unscarred. But scars are not failures of healing. They are healing. The body closes what it can. The mind does too if you let it. Yet, instead of trusting that natural closure, we pick at it, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, as if reopening it will make it disappear. We live in a time where we glorify the idea of facing everything. But no one talks about the quiet strength in not reopening the wound. In choosing peace over postmortem. There's something deeply sacred about leaving certain doors closed, not because you're avoiding what's inside, but because you've already lived it. You've already felt it enough. You've already carried its lesson in your bones. There's a line between courage and compulsion, between healing and rehearsing, and many of us cross it without noticing. We replay what broke us because it makes us feel alive, it gives us a story. There's comfort in the familiarity of pain. It feels like identity, like purpose. To stop revisiting it feels like forgetting who we are. But what if that's exactly what healing asks for? The courage to live without the old story. You don't heal by returning to who you were. You heal by allowing who you were to rest. Sometimes healing doesn't come with tears, or deep insights, or revelations. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the moment you stop trying to make sense of everything. It comes when you stop needing to label your suffering as meaningful. When you realize that not every pain has to be understood for it to lose its power. Think about the way a body heals from a cut. It doesn't debate the knife. It doesn't analyze the wound. It simply closes, layer by layer, cell by cell, guided by something ancient and unseen. Your mind can do the same if you stop interrupting it, but we rarely give it the chance. Because stillness feels like failure. Not doing feels like neglect. So we keep poking, naming, dissecting, and call it healing. We've been taught that pain demands confrontation. But what if pain also needs rest? What if it's not always about breaking open, but about softening, letting time dissolve the sharp edges you keep resharpening with attention? There's a quiet form of wisdom that modern self-help rarely speaks about. The wisdom of leaving things alone. Of letting something fade without ceremony. Of not needing to perform recovery. You don't have to relive your trauma to release it. You don't have to bleed again to prove you've healed. Maybe real healing is remembering without reopening. Maybe it's the courage to stop visiting the wound altogether. We're told that avoiding pain is weakness, but sometimes avoidance is not denial, it's discernment. It's knowing when to stop feeding what only grows darker the more you touch it. The truth is, healing is not linear. It's not a ladder you climb toward perfection. It's a spiral, looping between memory and meaning, pain and peace. The deeper you go, the easier it becomes to mistake movement for progress. But sometimes the most profound healing happens when you stop spiraling altogether. Because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that whisper says, you don't have to go back there anymore. Maybe you don't need to reopen your pain to heal it. Maybe you just need to stop feeding it. And in that silence, in that pause between remembering and releasing, something soft begins to breathe again. Not the old you, not the broken you, but the one who never needed fixing. There's a strange kind of pride in saying, I've done the deep work. We wear it like a badge, proof that we've faced our shadows, revisited every wound, analyzed every childhood memory until we can explain our pain perfectly. But the truth few dare to admit is this: most of us aren't healing when we do that. We're performing healing. We're creating meaning around suffering because we're terrified of what we'd be without it. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. He didn't mean avoiding pain, he meant avoiding silence. Because silence exposes how much of our pain we've turned into identity. When you strip away the story, what remains? Who are you without your trauma? For many, the answer is terrifying. So we cling to the process. We keep diving back into our past because it makes us feel like we're doing something. We equate progress with effort. The more emotional labor we perform, the more awake we must be. But in truth, this endless introspection can become a new kind of prison. It's the illusion of depth, the belief that the deeper you go, the more real your healing becomes. But not all depths are meant to be explored. Some are meant to be left untouched. Because when you dive without oxygen, without boundaries, without purpose, even the water that once comforted you will start to drown you. Jung believed that healing doesn't come from knowing your shadow, but from integrating it, acknowledging its presence without letting it control you. Yet most people don't integrate, they orbit. They circle their pain endlessly, mistaking movement for mastery. They return to their wounds to confirm who they are, not to transform. Nietzsche saw pain differently. He called it the source of strength. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But even that line has been misunderstood. Nietzsche wasn't glorifying suffering. He was reminding us that strength is not found in the wound itself, but in what we create beyond it. Strength is not in reliving pain, but in transcending it. When you stare too long into the abyss, he warned, the abyss stares back. That's not just a poetic warning, it's psychological reality. The more you identify with your pain, the more it becomes your reflection. In the age of hyper-awareness, people mistake self-knowledge for freedom. But knowing why you're hurt doesn't necessarily stop the hurting. Sometimes the intellect becomes the jailer of the heart. You understand everything but feel nothing shift. You can name your trauma, but not release it. Because awareness without surrender becomes control. And control is the enemy of healing. The psyche doesn't need constant analysis. It needs compassion. It needs space. It needs permission to move forward without being dissected every step of the way. The unconscious is not a wound to be fixed, it's a landscape to be respected. Imagine a lake after a storm. The surface is turbulent, chaotic, full of motion. But beneath that, in the quiet depths, everything remains still. That's your mind. You don't calm the storm by diving into it, you wait for it to pass. But most of us keep diving, thinking the solution lies somewhere down there, in the mud, in the old wreckage. We've confused healing with excavation. We've made self-analysis an addiction, a constant need to reopen, reinterpret, and relive. But healing isn't about finding more pain. It's about finding the place inside you that's no longer defined by it. Psychologists call this re-traumatization, the act of reliving an old pain so vividly that the body and brain can't tell the difference between past and present. The nervous system doesn't care if you're doing inner work. It just knows it's back in danger. Every time you go back without gentleness, you teach your body that peace is unsafe. We mistake suffering for sincerity. The more we cry, the more we break down, the more we bleed on the page, the more real we believe our growth is. But that's not growth, that's attachment disguised as enlightenment. It's ego hiding behind pain. There's a shadow side to the self-improvement movement, a quiet addiction to introspection. We become fixated on finding what's wrong, convinced that healing lies in perfect understanding. But the deeper you dig, the more you risk losing the simplicity of being. Not every ache is an unsolved mystery. Not every scar hides a hidden truth. The unconscious, Jung said, heals through symbol, through art, dreams, embodiment, through living, not through constant reflection. Life itself is the therapist. Every experience, every sunrise, every silence is a session. But if you never leave the chair, if you never walk out of the office of your own mind, you'll never discover that healing was happening all along, not because of your effort, but despite it. There's a certain arrogance in believing that you can think your way to peace. That if you just find the right cause, the right memory, the right insight, you'll finally be free. But peace is not found through understanding. It's found through acceptance. You can't analyze your way into wholeness. You have to live your way there. It's like tending to a garden. You don't keep pulling the plant out of the soil to check if it's growing. You water it, give it light, and trust the process. The same is true for your mind. Growth doesn't require constant interference. It requires patience. The self that constantly seeks to fix itself never learns to rest. And rest is what heals you. When you stop analyzing, stop trying to figure yourself out, something beautiful happens. Life starts to breathe through you again. Not the rehearsed version of life you keep replaying in your head, but the real, unscripted one. The more you try to control your healing, the more it slips away. Because healing is not a product of force, but of surrender. It's not found in dissecting every emotion, but in allowing them to move through you without judgment. To truly heal, you must accept this paradox. The more you chase peace, the more it runs. But when you stop chasing, when you sit, when you breathe, when you stop needing to understand, peace finds you. So maybe the goal isn't to dig deeper. Maybe it's to stop digging altogether. Because the deeper truth is this: not every wound needs closure. Some simply need peace. Healing isn't always a thunderstorm. Sometimes, it's the quiet decision to stop searching for one. For years, you may have believed that healing meant doing something, journaling more, meditating harder, talking longer, crying deeper. You were told that growth requires labor, that pain demands effort, that the universe only rewards those who never stop fighting for peace. But what if peace doesn't need to be fought for? What if it arrives the moment you stop resisting what already is? There comes a point when you've read all the books, listened to every philosopher, cried in every therapy session, and still, something inside you feels unfinished. You've done the work, but the ache remains. That's when the real shift begins. Because you start to realize that maybe healing isn't something you do to yourself. Maybe it's something that happens through you when you finally stop trying so hard to direct it. Alan Watts called this the paradox of surrender, the idea that the harder you try to let go, the tighter you hold on. He said, you can't force yourself to relax. You can only stop trying to force anything at all. Healing works the same way. The more you chase wholeness, the more you affirm your brokenness. The more you analyze peace, the further away it drifts. You can't become whole by chasing wholeness. You become whole by realizing you never lost it. There's a quiet art to healing that doesn't require reliving the past or conquering it. It requires softening toward it. You start to see your wounds not as barriers, but as openings, places where life tried to enter, but you resisted. Healing happens when you finally stop resisting what happened. When you stop needing it to make sense. This is where transformation begins. Not in the loud victories, but in the still moments when you stop arguing with your life. You stop asking why me? And start whispering evenness. You start to see that the real work is not about changing the past, but changing your relationship to it. You stop trying to erase the memories and instead, you stop giving them the power to define you. You stop trying to be the healed version of yourself, the perfect, calm, enlightened being, and you simply allow yourself to be the present one. The human heart is not a machine that repairs itself by calculation. It's a living rhythm that learns to beat again after silence. When you let go of control, when you stop micromanaging your healing, you allow something bigger, something wiser, to take over. Life begins to flow again. Emotions start to move not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped damming the river. It's in that stillness that forgiveness enters, not as a moral act, but as a natural response. Forgiveness isn't saying, "What happened was okay." It's saying, "I refuse to keep carrying it." It's the moment you stop being the archive of your suffering. It's the moment you stop rehearsing what hurt you just to feel like you still matter. Forgiveness is not reconciliation, it's release. It's an energetic shift, a nervous system exhale. It's the quiet, invisible work of unclenching your spirit from a story it no longer needs to hold. You don't have to let go in a dramatic way. Sometimes, letting go is as simple as no longer needing to think about it. You wake up one morning, and the thought that used to hurt doesn't. The song that used to sting doesn't. The name that used to echo feels quiet. That's healing, not the fireworks kind, but the subtle kind that sneaks in while you weren't watching. Healing is not the moment you understand the pain. It's the moment the pain stops controlling you. You start to notice that your life no longer orbits around the wound. That you can think about the past without collapsing into it. That you can remember what happened and still feel the sunlight on your face. That's when you know you've stopped carrying it as identity. It's no longer your narrative, it's just something that happened. The art of quiet healing is realizing that life keeps moving whether or not you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to become perfect. It meets you exactly where you are, tired, confused, unfinished, and whispers, "That's enough." You realize that the universe never demanded your perfection, it only asked for your participation. Healing isn't an accomplishment, it's a rhythm, a tide that flows in and out, asking you only to stop resisting its pull. Think of how nature heals. A tree doesn't rush to close a broken branch. It seals it with sap, quietly, patiently. The earth doesn't weep for every fallen leaf, it turns it into soil. Everything in nature transforms pain into something living again. You are no different. The difference is, you keep interrupting the process because you want control. But control is the enemy of healing. The more you try to decide how your heart should feel, the more you delay its natural return to balance. Healing happens when you stop narrating the process and start trusting it. It's like standing in the ocean. The more you fight the current, the more exhausted you become. But when you surrender, when you let the tide carry you, you realize the water was never trying to drown you. It was trying to show you how to float. In this kind of healing, there is no timeline, no checklist, no endpoint. There's only flow, the ebb and return of feeling, of remembering, of letting go again and again until it becomes instinct. And somewhere in that flow, you find peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally stop trying to make it so. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of resistance to it. And when you stop resisting, you start receiving. You start noticing small things again. The warmth of sunlight, the stillness of your own breath, the quiet comfort of just being here. That's the moment you realize healing is not something you chase. It's something you allow. Healing isn't a storm. It's the moment the water finally becomes still enough to reflect the sky. And when that stillness comes, when you finally stop digging, fixing, analyzing, you don't lose yourself. You meet yourself. The version of you that never needed repairing. The version that was always waiting for you to stop trying so hard and simply come home. That's the real transformation, not in becoming someone new, but in remembering you were always whole. Morning light spills across the same room that once felt like a tomb. The person who once sat in darkness, dissecting every scar, now sits quietly, watching dust dance in the sunlight. Nothing dramatic has changed. The same life, the same walls, the same memories, and yet, everything feels different. The air feels lighter. The silence doesn't threaten them anymore, it holds them. This is what real healing looks like. It's not a triumphant ending or a cinematic breakthrough. It's a quiet return, a homecoming to yourself. You stop being the story of your pain and start becoming the witness of your peace. The wounds didn't vanish, they just stopped defining the shape of your life. You start living again, not as someone who has overcome, but as someone who has integrated. You no longer chase closure because you understand that not everything in life closes neatly. Some things remain open, not as wounds, but as windows. They let light in. Healing in its truest form is not a process of erasure. It's a practice of presence. It's remembering that your scars don't need to disappear for you to be free. They only need to stop being the only thing you see. Every day becomes a subtle act of peace. You stop needing to interpret every emotion. You stop labeling every feeling as progress or regression. Some days you feel heavy, some days light, and both are okay. You realize healing isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about no longer fearing the days you don't. You start understanding boundaries, not as walls, but as expressions of self-respect. You no longer let everyone access the most fragile parts of you. Not because you're hiding, but because you've learned that peace needs protection. You no longer confuse openness with availability. You can be compassionate without being consumed. Healing becomes less about changing who you are and more about changing how you live with yourself. You begin to move with gentleness, not because you're fragile, but because you finally understand the value of tenderness. You don't demand constant progress anymore. You start trusting slow growth, silent progress, invisible strength. The paradox of healing is that it doesn't make you invincible, it makes you human again. You stop striving to be perfect and start learning how to be real. You can cry without falling apart. You can love without fear of breaking. You can remember without relapsing. In this state, healing stops being a destination and becomes a rhythm, an ongoing dialogue with life. You make peace with uncertainty. You stop rushing to define what everything means. You allow moments to simply exist. You begin to notice that your mind, once cluttered with analysis, now finds peace in simplicity. Making tea, watching the rain, listening to silence without needing to fill it. This simplicity isn't boredom, it's presence. It's the beauty of existing without needing to constantly improve the experience. Healing in the modern world is an act of rebellion. Everything around you demands speed, the next achievement, the next transformation, the next version of you. But you learn that real transformation is quiet. It doesn't happen under pressure. It unfolds naturally, like dawn breaking over the horizon. The greatest sign of healing isn't that you feel nothing, it's that you feel everything and still choose peace. It's the ability to hold joy and sorrow in the same breath, and not collapse under either. It's learning that you can miss someone deeply and still move forward. That you can grieve and still grow. That you can have questions and still rest. Life will continue to bring pain. But you no longer fear it, because you trust your capacity to meet it gently. Pain may visit, but it no longer stays as a guest, it passes through. And slowly, the past loses its gravity. It becomes something you can visit without getting trapped. You can look at your younger self, the one who fought so hard to heal, and smile. Not because you're done, but because you understand now, healing was never about finishing. It was about remembering you were whole enough to begin with. You realize you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be alive. Messy, vulnerable, unfinished, and still worthy. And that's the final integration. You stop living as a project and start living as a presence. You stop trying to be someone who has healed and simply become someone who lives freely. Maybe healing isn't about reopening every wound. Maybe it's about walking through life so gently that they no longer hurt. The same light that once revealed your scars now illuminates your peace. The same silence that once felt unbearable now feels like home. You don't need to chase healing anymore, because healing has found you. And in that stillness, in that quiet awareness of your own wholeness, you understand what all the noise was hiding. You were never broken. You were only waiting to remember.